from Italy to all the friends of Palm Beach Chess in Florida. This is International Master Camelia Ciobanu, and it is my greatest pleasure to invite you today to study a middle game together. And let's look upon this position. It results from a game played at a championship between Volker Anton having the white pieces against Gerardus van Perlo having black. And we have this position resulted from the King's Indian defense with a Zamish variation. And we can see that white missed to castle long, because generally white would castle long in this sort of variation, because as you can see, white has already initiated an attack on the castle on the king side, pointing toward black's king, and white would like to push the pawns as far away as to trade black's pawns that are protecting the castle. And in this way white wants to open up a file so that it can double maybe the queen with the rook and infiltrate and checkmate black's king. So this is the best case scenario that we can think of, but let's see if they really manage to do that. Well, in this position white is to move. We are at move number 18, and as I said, white didn't get to castle the king. You see that black also initiated an attack with the queen side. But what is so special about this position? Well, black not only pushed the pawn up to e5 but also to c5, and those squares being occupied by the knight, by the pawns, excuse me, they don't give the knight any place to go in the center or near the center. This is very important. We will understand later why. Good. At the first glance, we can see that there is an immediate threat because black is attacking the weak pawn on f3, but other than that, black's pieces are very passive. We can see this knight and the bishop, the knight that is blocking the other bishop that is not developed. The rook is on d8, so on a closed file it has really no potential in there. Good, so we can only see that maybe if black at some point would push a4, the rook on a8 can be activated, but most of his pieces are misplaced and the position is closed. So I think that the question that arises in this moment is, what is white going to do with the king? Because obviously he shouldn't castle queenside, because in that way he will take the rook away from the h file, and actually he needs the rook on the h file, because in the future we saw that white wants to attack black's king. Okay. Also, the king should not stay in the way of the other rook. Probably white would like to bring the other rook on g1, or why not to double, like rook h2, and the other rook should come to h1 and eventually open the h file. Okay, but we have a weak pawn that is under threat, and also the king is not castled. So what is white going to do? And he finds a very nice idea. I don't know if you ever heard of the central castle. Okay, that is a joke. It doesn't exist. But in this case, the best spot for white's king to land on is in proximity of the center. And we will see it really quickly. Okay, so move number 18, white brings the king to e2 and he's defending the pawn on f3 with the king. So it doesn't look very obvious, but if we analyze the position deeper, we understand where this king will be better positioned. Okay, b6, bishop e3. Now it's time for white to create a battery and attack the weak pawn on h6. Okay, black is trying to reposition his pieces, but you can see that they are now limited on the last border, the last frontier. Okay, so bishop to g2, defending the pawn. And now the move that I most like in the whole game is king to d3. So the king reaches a very safe position in a closed center behind the fortress of these pawns. Can you see? We have two pawn chains like a pyramid with the top right in black's center. So I really like this position so much. Okay, knight to a6. Black is trying to send the king away from d3, but of course we have to protect the position of the king. And then finally white can take the pawn, so white has just gained the pawn. Now black is repositioning his pieces in order to be able to push the pawn up to b5, open a file, and try to obtain a counterplay on the queen side, and so maybe reach to the king once he infiltrates the rook on the b file that has been opened. But it takes a very long time, and most probably white will be able to be the one opening up black's castle. Okay, so what is white going to do in this moment? Well, it is time to try and open a file, and in order to do that, he should push one of the pawns on the king side. But the question is, which pawn should white push? Well, if he pushes the h pawn, that gives black opportunity to keep the files closed by pushing, and so block the position and even trade queens. So the first thing to do is first to push the pawn to g5 and attacking the queen. So then when white will push h5, black will have no choice, but the pawns will trade. So after queen to 7, queen takes, king takes, and okay, what is white going to do now? He doesn't push the pawn right away because there is a small detail he needs to take care of before, and that is getting rid of the bad bishop for black's good bishop. So bishop to h3, a very good positional move. Knight to f8, and finally h5, because black cannot escape the trade. Okay, so black will try the counterplay, attacking this pawn chain instead with a pawn on b5, and so white will trade bishops and gain the second pawn. Well, black is doing all he can to try to make the queen side explode, but it doesn't help too much, and white was very inspired not to take on a4 and give mobility to black's knights and give him targets so they can attack something, enter, and then attack white's weaknesses. But instead he focuses on the side of the board where his interest is, so on the king's side, as I said. And now he wants to double the rook, so he's preparing rook h2, rook h8. White doubles the rooks, and finally the pawn on b3 will be falling soon anyways, and finally the h file gets opened. Okay, and now white has even an intermediate move, penetrating black's territory with a knight, because from f5 the knight is also attacking the weak pawn on d6. So king takes, rook takes, and black is defending the pawn on d6, but that doesn't help too much because white just takes it and then check, takes the knight back. And white has entered into black's camp even with a rook, and now white has 3 passed pawns, the pawns on the a file, b file, and d file. So he just pushes the pawn, the knight attacks the rook goes behind the other pawn, and so on. Now the king gets activated, knight to d7, rook to d6, and black takes on a3. Now black sacrifices the knight, and he takes the chance to create a threat. Now if white is not attentive enough, he can even lose something, because if he just pushes the pawn to b7, then black can sacrifice the rook on c3 with the check. White will have to take, and black will be the first one to promote to queen, and white misses his opportunity to do the same. Okay, so white has to pay attention and simply block black's passed pawn and then go forward in order to promote himself. Okay, king to c3, so when the rook moves away, the pawn on b2 falls down, and let's see, king to b2, the rook goes to prevent the promotion. White wants to bring the rook to c8 and so cover the promotion square. Black blocks the pawn, and now move number 50, king to c3, and black resigns because obviously white is going to win. He's got 2 pawns up. Soon enough he'll take this pawn with the king, then bring the king up to c6, the rook to c8, and black will have to sacrifice his rook. His king cannot even approach. Can you see? The king cannot come closer, any closer. Okay, and so white won, but I really liked the move king to e2 at move number 18, and then at move number 21, king to d3. It's like a central castle, and it was really the best way that white could free up some lines. So also for this rook, if it was needed for the queen, it had all the freedom to go on the second rank. And by simply taking a pawn and opening up a file, infiltrating, we saw that it wasn't very difficult for white to conclude this game with a victory. Well, thank you so much for watching. I am so excited about this series, and I cannot wait to find you in our next video. All the best!